Time slip. When you end up in a different point in the river of time, seeing people from over 100 years ago, or ending up in buildings that have long been broken down, or even seeing yourself. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and let's go back to the beginning. Could time travel be a natural phenomenon? My experience in Washington's Cascade Mountains. I have always loved the outdoors. I was fortunate enough to be born in the great Pacific Northwest, the Western Washington Cascades to be exact. My father and I spent much of my early years of life exploring the mountains, fishing, and hunting. There are parts of the Cascade I know like the back of my hand. One of those places is called Goblin Creek, up the Index Galima Road off Highway 2. When I was a kid, we would drive up there to do some fishing and shooting, but also to collect a specific type of rock that, when cut in half and polished, would resemble a scenic picture of the view of mountains from within a cave. I do not recall the true name of these stones. We just called them picture rocks. My father's friend and neighbor owned an art gallery and a mineral shop that used to be a church. If you've ever driven through Startup on your way from Sultan to Gold Bar on Highway 2, you might remember seeing the robot sculpture outside the shop that my dad built. This is the place that we sold the stone for $2 a pound. It was lucrative revenue for a preteen. The walk from the creek where we harvested these rocks to the dirt road wasn't particularly long, but lengthy enough that you could presumably get lost while en route if one didn't know where to go. In the years we spent at this creek, I have only seen 2 other people out there. One was a game warden that heard the gunshots from our target practice session and tracked us down to make sure everything was fine. The other is the subject of my curiosity. When I was about 14, I distinctly remember hauling a backpack full of these rocks up from the creek to my dad's truck. Along the way, I ran into a man that looked to be about 30 years old. We both appeared to be surprised that we could run into anyone in this rather remote section of the mountains. But as I got closer to this man, he was heading down to the creek. I was heading up to the road. He seemed to grow increasingly more startled, as if he was seeing a ghost. He didn't say anything as I passed. He just stared at me, seemingly trying to figure out the appropriate words to ask me something. After passing him, I remember thinking how much this guy looked like he could be in my family. The similarities were striking. I continued on to the truck, dumped my load of rock off at the truck, and headed back down to the river to my dad. When I arrived, I told him about the encounter and asked him if he had seen this man, to which he replied that he hadn't. I have remembered this encounter quite vividly since then. Last year I was visiting my family and decided to head up to the old Goblin Creek for nostalgic purposes. It had been almost 15 years since I was last up there. Along the way up there, I found out that the Index Galima Road had been apparently washed out years ago. Luckily, I knew of another way up there via Jack Pass. I found the dirt road and parked where my dad used to park and proceeded to walk through the woods down to the creek. Along the way, I saw something that absolutely shook me to the core. As I was about halfway through the woods, I was startled to see someone else coming up from the creek. A boy, about 14 years old. He was wearing a backpack that looked to be burdened by heavy weights. As we got closer, I began to get increasingly confused and shocked, as the boy looked exactly like I did at his age. I meant to say something to him as we passed, but could not figure out the right words to express what I was thinking at the moment. He passed me and kept going. I walked a little ways and finally stopped when it all really hit me. I remember the encounter from my teenage years and realized that I had just lived the other half of the experience. Both the man and the boy were me, roughly 15 years removed. I turned to catch up to the boy in the thick western Washington woods. I ran all the way back up to the road where my truck was to find nothing. There wasn't anywhere else beside the road for him to go to, and I hadn't stalled so long as to not be able to catch up to him. He was simply gone. Curiosity got the best of me, so I hurried down to the creek, half expecting to find my dad fishing on the bank, 15 years younger, but found nobody. I ended up going home and deciding that this experience was too unbelievable to tell even my friends and family. I just wanted to get this out there to the wonderful Reddit community to see what others think, and hopefully to see if anyone else has had this type of experience as well. Time travel after school. I live in an area north of Toronto called Thornhill. It's an older area, first discovered and settled in the mid-1700s, but mostly not developed until the mid to late 1800s. Over the years, there have been plenty of strange happenings in the area, and being born in the mid-1980s and not having internet as a child, I know a lot of them. I never experienced anything weird beyond a light in the sky easily dismissed as a satellite, or a noise in the field near my house. That was probably an opposum until close to the end of elementary school. In the early spring of 7th grade, my friend Andrew and I were walking over to his place after school to hang out for a bit. It wasn't too far from school, maybe 1.5 kilometers at most. To get to his house, we had to walk through an area of Old Thornhill, called that because of its heritage buildings and almost cottage-like atmosphere. On the way to his house is an Anglican church with a public park and a heritage house behind it. Not only did this happen to be a shortcut to his house, it was also extremely creepy. We started walking down the path, despite my objections, and made it past the clearing and onto the heritage grounds. Here's what's really strange. There was a wedding going on right behind the house in the open field, now has benches and historical information, next to the path we had to take. Neither of us heard the wedding as we walked up, or even noticed it until we were already there. Everyone was dressed amazingly, men in fine suits, women in nice dresses, real old-world-looking garments. Not wanting to disturb the party, Andrew and I snuck past and made it to the front gate, which turned out to be locked. We tried to lift his bike over the fence, but couldn't get it over. Plus, I was a fat kid, so there was no way I was going over either. So we gave up and went back to take the long way. The path we were on is only 30 or 40 feet from where the wedding was, so we walked back quietly. The strange thing was, when we looked over at where the group was, nothing was there. We walked back up the path over to the yard. Nothing there, not so much as a mark in the grass of a chair or a footprint in the dirt. I've been back there a few times since, but I've never seen anything unusual go on. A vanishing village. Belfast in the late 1960s played host to one of the most bizarre paranormal occurrences that I have yet to hear of. My mother Mora and her younger sister Colette were the witnesses. This event occurred just before the onset of the Troubles, which was a period of political and social unrest. The story begins with a bus journey. Mora and Colette were heading into the city center, and the bus at the time traveled along the Donegal Road. The exact position using modern-day landmarks is where the roundabout linking to the M1 is located. During this time period, the roundabout was under construction. For some unknown reason, the bus services turned at the bottom of this street. Mora and Colette began their journey by leaving their home, which was located just above the Donegal Road roundabout, and they walked past it. On their left-hand side, they observed a series of little whitewashed cottages as they headed towards the city center. The cottages in question were pristine and decorated in a distinctly old-fashioned manner. I'm not referring simply to the decor of a bygone decade, but perhaps the previous century. They had one truly distinctive feature, and that was the bright pink frames that lined the windows. At the time, the windows were being carefully scrubbed and polished by a quite unexceptional woman, who upon passing, greeted them with a cheerful, "Hello, how are you? And nice day, isn't it?" This was common practice among the polite and friendly folk of Northern Ireland. As a common theme right through these stories, Mora attributed absolutely no lasting significance to this exchange. They simply replied in an equally amiable manner and continued with their journey. As mentioned before, the bus service turned out on the Donegal Road. And this is where the point where Colette and Mora disembark after their journey from the stops. This meant that the bus had to navigate the unfinished roundabout and pass the cottages. The problem was that this time, they were gone. Mora and Colette simply viewed a space left over, full of debris and building materials for the roundabout. There was no sign of a thatched roof or a whitewashed brick amongst the rubble, nor a flash of bright pink framed windows. Did these cottages get demolished that very same day? Maybe. But why would the woman bother to carefully hand clean the windows in such a thorough manner? It was as if it was a place in which people lived in. Or perhaps there resided a disturbed spirit roused from dormancy, as a roundabout was built over the top of the site, where her beautiful home once stood.